Hi, this is John Drew for ICDE, and I wanted to talk to you today about setting up a proper die line for packaging. So a die line for packaging should always be done in Illustrator. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to set up your 4 layers. And so one layer should be labeled image, another type, another fold lines and crop marks, and the next one should be labeled die line. And so once you have your 4 layers set up, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you create the die line in red. So a die line should always be in red, and the line thickness should be 0.25 of a point. That's a hairline. It should be a solid red line because that means cut, and a dashed red line means perforated. A die line using a black line instead of a red line is incorrect and can be misinterpreted. Anything inside of the die line will print. Fold lines should never go inside of the red die line. If so, you're basically indicating that you want those fold lines to print. And I've seen those mistakes being made on print jobs, as well as you see all these kind of die lines on the internet that are just basically incorrect. So once you have set up your die line, what you want to do is your next layer is you want to create your crop marks and your fold lines. And so this is a crop mark, and that's a fold line. And so a crop mark or a crop line is indicated using a solid black line right here, and it's a hairline thickness, and the crop mark should be, well, they're typically about 1/2 of an inch. A fold line is basically the same thing, except it's 3 dashed lines. And it shouldn't be 4 dashed lines or 2 dashed lines. They're 3 dashed lines and the same line thickness and length as a crop mark. So both these fold lines and crop marks, they're typically positioned about 1/4 of an inch away from the die line. So once you have those two things set up, you want to set up your image. And so in this case, the green field here indicates the image. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you're creating your image and you're bleeding the image off of the die line, in this case this would be a 4-side image, the bleed shouldn't be any more than 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. If the bleed is beyond that, that's really considered a sloppy mechanical. And what ends up happening is you may not be able to get as many impressions up on one side of a piece of paper as you normally would with a clean mechanical. So the difference could be you can only get 3 up on a piece of paper instead of 4. And so what you're doing is you're making the print job way more expensive than what it needs to be. Now the second thing that you need to really be concerned about when setting up your image is that any place where it's going to glue, and this would be a place where it's going to glue, right here, these 3 folds or flaps, and this one, you want to make sure that you don't have any ink on those flaps because you want the glue to stick to the virgin paper. And so what ends up happening, well, what's typically used is water-based glue and oil-based ink. And so oil and water don't mix, and under harsh conditions like a refrigerator or freezer, if there is ink here, the glue will pop and the box will fall apart. You see this at any of the large box stores. When you go to the freezer section, you'll see that some of the boxes have popped loose, and that's because the designer designed it so that the image would go over top of, or ink would go over top of the area that's supposed to glue. And so that's considered a really poor mechanical. Right, so then once you have that done, then what you want to do is you want to put your type on its own separate layer. And the type should be on its own layer in case of spelling mistakes. And once the client has approved it, then what you want to do is you want to outline your typography before you send it to press. Therefore, you don't have to, because now your type is vector art, and you don't have to worry about sending the font along with it. Now, these are basically the 4 layers, but then what you want to do is you want to separate it. So this is one mechanical, and so this would be whatever the name of the job is, and then I'd label after it skin, so that so that the printer understands that this is what is going to be printed on the surface of the box. And you want to leave the fold line and crop marks there because they help the printer in registering up the job. And then you want to send them another separate mechanical, which will be these 2 layers, which are the fold lines and crop marks and the die line. And so this will be its own separate mechanical. That should be labeled a die line. And what the printer will do is typically they send it out of house, and someone will create a die line, and those are like, in this case, it would be basically knife blades put into a piece of plywood, and it kind of looks like what your mom used when you made cookies, when you made those star-shaped cookies. And so this is kind of like a cookie cutter, except it's super sharp, and it and you cut the impression out, and these fold lines here indicate where the thing folds up, so that the piecemeal workers can put these boxes together and glue them up. And so this is basically the 4 layers that you need to create, so that you can set up a die line correctly and also send the printed impression that you want on the box. And so that's about it. Once again, that's one of the mechanicals you want to send, and then this is another one. So again, this is John Drew for ICDE, and thanks for listening. I hope you found this informative.